Welcome to Finding Certainty with your host and U.S. Army veteran, Patrick Laing. Over the next hour, you'll learn from Patrick and his expert guests how to attract more certainty into your business and your life. Now, here is your host, Patrick Laing.
Welcome to Finding Certainty. Don't know about you, but it's my favorite day of the week. Not only is it Friday, which we all look forward to, but it's also the day that I get to either do my monologue, first Friday of every month, or get to have extraordinary guests here on Finding Certainty. For the last, now 10 months now, I've been doing a weekly monologue, first Friday of every month, breaking down and unpacking and dissecting different forms of and approaches to finding certainty in our lives. Started with accountability, which may be the most important of them all, although that's hard to say when you look at topics like balance and composure, discipline, endurance. I've talked about faith, talked about giving, which is absolute recipe for certainty in our lives. I talked about humility, integrity, and now we are at J. Well, I've been going back and forth about what to talk about. It's funny because I'm surrounded by a lot of J names. In fact, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, we had a guest here on Finding Certainty named James Harrison. There's one of those J names, and it's actually the first guest I've ever had on Finding Certainty more than twice. I've had maybe 3 or 4 that I've had on a couple of times, but James was the first one I've ever had 3 times. And it's because his company, his business, a company named Invisis, a product named I Defend, is so critically important. This month is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And while I interviewed him first on my show, then he was on Frank Heldring's show, and then he was on my show again, discussing his platform and how it can bless your life and help create more certainty in your life. It can help protect your identity, your finances, your devices, even your kids' video games, cell phones, etc., etc. So anyway, he was one of the J names that has been in and out of my life over the last few weeks. I deal every day with one of the most incredible people in my life, Miss Jill McCauley. Jill is a great example of today's topic. I also have a friend named Joe Olivetti, another J name. I want to give both Jill and Joe, and also James Harrison, if he's listening, I want to give them a shout out because they are great examples of individuals who embody today's principle. In fact, James, through his work, and Joe and Jill, through their work at Certainty Management, are not just embodying it, but creating it and helping develop it in other people's lives, which is a very important reminder. So what is the topic? Today, we're going to be talking about joy. J is for joy. Joy is a simple word, but it's a complex emotion. It's one of those things we all seek, yet often don't fully understand. On today's show, I'm going to try to help us all to understand joy, understand it, not only where it comes from and how to create it, but in fact, how it surrounds us at all times, how it is imbued into everything we do. If we notice it, if we let it, if we recognize it, joy can be a part of every day and almost every moment, even the hard ones. So many of us think of joy as fleeting, something we can only experience in rare, perfect moments. But in truth, joy is so much more than a momentary feeling. It's something deeper, something lasting, and it is very much something that is real. I believe that joy is an outgrowth of living a life of certainty, of living a life full of these characteristics that we've been talking about during these monologues all year long. Accountability and balance and giving and integrity. These are characteristics that create certainty in our life and most definitely create joy. So when I say certainty, I don't mean that life is perfect or without challenges. It's not. We know that. In fact, joy often doesn't come from the absence of hardship, but from knowing who we are, what we stand for, and what our purpose is, even in the midst of life's unpredictability. When we have that kind of certainty, joy becomes a natural part, an inherent and consistent, even persistent and pervasive part of our lives. It's not dependent on external circumstances, but it's rooted in something far more stable and enduring. Think of joy like sunlight breaking through the clouds after a storm. It doesn't erase the storm. It doesn't pretend the rain never happened, but when that light shines through, it illuminates everything in a new way, especially if you notice it. If you take your blinders off, look up and see it. It's kind of how joy works. It shows up even in the darkest times, reminding us that there is always something worth celebrating, something to hold on to, something to look forward to, something to believe in, even when the going gets hard. This is a very important point. It shows up even when hard things happen, right? It happens independent of external circumstances, like I said. That's a really important differentiator between happiness and joy. Happiness is usually rooted in something. It can be a promotion, a romance, a great hamburger. Happiness can come from those things, but joy is rooted in something, as I said, far more stable, far more enduring. It's independent of external circumstances. That's one of the first lessons I want to share with you today. Life comes at us fast. It's hard. And we've all experienced mortality, right? There's lots of examples. Financial struggles, parenting and children challenges, health struggles, divorce, bankruptcy, even trauma or violence, or those sorts of things that oftentimes impact us despite our best intentions, despite our trying to be a good and kind and honest person. Many of us have been impacted by these things that unfortunately happen to us, sometimes because of us, sometimes because of our choices, and so forth and so on, but they happen. And so how are we supposed to find joy, develop joy, be a joyful person and a joy-filled person when life is so hard? And it always will be. It's the nature of life. It's the purpose of life. Many will even say that that's why we're here, to be tested and tried and stretched and to become more of who we can become. Well, even in the most difficult of times, we see examples through history and elsewhere of people who have found joy even in the face of very difficult circumstances. I mean, Helen Keller, of course, was a great example. She lived without sight and sound, and yet she still found joy in discovering ways to communicate with the world. Imagine how isolating it must have been to be locked in silence and darkness. It's hard to even imagine, right? Yet her discovery of language and that connection with another human being brought her immeasurable joy. She once said, "Although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of it." Let me say that again. I think it's a great quote, and it's a integral piece when we're talking about how to develop more joy in our lives. Although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of it. I love that. I believe that is an integral reminder when we're in this discussion of joy, how to find more joy in our lives. For Keller, the joy didn't come from what she lacked, but from what she discovered within herself and her ability to connect with others. I mentioned Jill McCauley. She is another great example. I've had her on my show. She is one of those who's been on at least twice. I believe she's only been on 2 times, maybe even 3. Jill is my executive assistant, one of our partners here at Certainty Management. She is a senior VP of admin with the company. She's also paralyzed from the collarbone down due to a rollover accident that she experienced when she was 18 years old. Can you imagine being suddenly restricted to a wheelchair? Can you imagine having to have someone else feed you, help you go to the bathroom, help you dress, help you get in and out of bed or out of the car, literally have to help you do almost everything? And Jill will be the first to admit she's dealt with depression, she's dealt with feelings of hopelessness, and yet through it all, she's learned how to find joy. She was recently nominated as Miss Wheelchair Washington, was able to go back to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and run or compete in the national Miss Wheelchair competition. She was a finalist in the top 5. We're very proud of her. But I'm especially proud of Jill because of her example of overcoming and of finding joy in her life. And do you know how she does it? Well, I'm going to talk today about principles that she embodies. She is a phenomenal example of that help her and those around her find more joy. You know, joy in these cases. I talk about Helen Keller, I talk about Jill, I talk about just life in general, right? Joy in these cases isn't about avoiding pain. It's about finding meaning and certainty amidst it, in the middle of it, as we're going through it, right? I talk about the 3 different views we have. We have foresight, midsight, and hindsight. And foresight, of course, is preparing, having faith, having a plan, looking forward to the future. And hindsight, of course, we talk about 2020 hindsight, is looking back on the experiences we've gone through, both good and bad, and seeing the lessons that we learned from them, the blessings, even the good that came from hard times. I believe, though, the most important, they're all important, don't take me wrong, but the most important is what I call midsight. It is stopping as we go through good and bad experiences, especially the hard ones. As we go through them, stopping, stepping back, and asking ourselves, what can I gain from this? How can I not only survive this experience, but thrive during it? How can I go so far as to learn and grow, and if I may be so bold, and even thrive or even find joy in this experience? It's a difficult question, but it is one that if you can understand it and learn it and apply it in your lives, can absolutely change your life. A couple of years ago, I was invited to be a part of a book compilation. It was a series called Mission Matters. I was a co-author together with Adam Torres. He invited several of us to be a part of it, to each write a chapter. This book is focused on CEOs whose companies are making a difference. I was invited because of what we do here at Certainty Management, what we're seeking to do to help nonprofits raise funding. We always say that we know that the number one thing nonprofits need is they need more funding, and the more funding they have, the more good they can do, the more joy they can help create. And so we seek to do that through our work here at Certainty Management. Well, I was invited to be a part of this book. I was actually asked to be on the cover with Adam and actually write the introduction. Then I wrote a chapter about accountability. Again, big topic for me. Well, The Oz Principle is a book that I read many years ago that talks about this principle of not being a victim, of not falling prey to and into a pattern of victimhood, right? It shares the story of the characters from The Wizard of Oz. Remember Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Lion, and the Tin Man. They meet up and they're traveling down the Yellow Brick Road. They're going to the city of Oz. Go see the great and powerful Wizard of Oz. And why are they going there? They're going there to have him fix their problems for them. What's a very important principle, I share it here because it's a key to finding joy and developing joy in our lives. They come to realize that they don't have to be victims, that they actually have it within them to do what they were hoping to do. The lion shows courage many times. The scarecrow uses his brain that he didn't think he had, but he does, to get them out of tricky situations and figure out puzzles and so forth. The Tin Man doesn't think he has a heart, but he realizes that, if we see as readers, and if we've watched the movie, read the book, he was one of the most emotional of them all. He actually arrested himself. He cried so much on one or two occasions. And then at the end of the story, Dorothy realizes she's been wearing the red slippers that she got from the Wicked Witch of the East the entire story. The red slippers that could take her home were literally on her feet. Well, what is the moral of the story? The story is that we have it within us to not be victims, to be able to get through our challenges, to even not just thrive, but actually find joy, fulfillment, and satisfaction in the process, in the journey. One of the most important questions they say in that book that we should be asking, and you've heard me say this before if you've been a fan of my show for a while, one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves and should ask ourselves is, what else can I do? I heard a story, and I've shared this one as well. I heard a story in college once about two employees who were sent home from work one day. They both were apparently contagious. Maybe there was some flu bug or something going through the office, maybe COVID or something. But they were sent home. And they said, you can't be here next 2 weeks. We'll pay you for your time, but you can't be here at work. And well, they both had the following thoughts. One thought, I can't afford to be off work for 2 weeks, even if they are paying me. I've got an overflowing inbox. I've got a ton of work. I've got deadlines. I don't know how I'm going to manage this. And he went home and was depressed for 2 weeks. Depressed, discouraged. He slept a lot, but he chose to be overwhelmed, discouraged, and anxious. The other employee said, sweet. I've needed a vacation. They didn't say I couldn't go fishing, right? So he goes home. He rents a bunch of movies. He buys a bunch of junk food. He goes fishing. He even has friends over. They didn't say I couldn't be with friends. They just said I couldn't be at work, right? He goes home and just sucks the marrow out of these 2 weeks, just totally enjoys himself, comes back to work rested, invigorated. He still had an overflowing inbox. He still had some catching up to do, but he got paid for a 2-week vacation. And that's how he chose to see it, where the other came back even more stressed, more overwhelmed, had the same overflowing inbox, but he did anything but find joy in the experience. So what was the difference between these two employees? The only difference was how they chose to see it. See, there are 3 truths. One is that our thoughts dictate our feelings. Number 2, most negative thoughts are distorted. We lose our job and we think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get a job again. I'm going to be living under a bridge soon. That's probably not true. That's just distorted, negative, inaccurate thoughts that we're telling ourselves, which affect how we feel, which are often not true, but they most definitely affect both our happiness and our joy. Maybe the most important reminder is that if we change our thoughts, we can change our feelings, just like that employee number 2 did when he was sent home. It comes down to mindset, perspective, and choice. In fact, some of the most profound examples of joy come from moments of great adversity. Let's look at Viktor Frankl. He was a physician, Jewish physician, who was in the Nazi concentration camps. He wrote a book about this called Man's Search for Meaning. And he talked about enduring the horrors of the Nazi concentration camps, and yet he found joy not in his surroundings, but in his purpose. He talked about how they all remember people in the camps who would range through serving others and giving up their last morsel of bread. And interesting, you think they give up that nourishment that they so needed, and yet those were the ones who more often than not survived. Isn't that interesting? In his book, he writes about how even those unimaginable circumstances, joy can be found by holding on to the meaning of life and one's sense of inner freedom. He said the only freedom that someone can take from you is your ability to choose your response in any given setting. And that sense of purpose, his certainty, allowed him to tap into joy despite everything he faced and everything he was going through. The last of human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. I love that. I read that book in college. I mean, it's been 40 years now almost, at least 35 years. And I still remember that principle all the time. It is a part of everything I do. Joe, my friend Joe Olivetti, who as I said, is a great example of joy, is a great example of this principle of serving others. He shared with me the other day that joy is actually an acronym. He says the J stands for Jesus, the O stands for others, and the Y stands for you. And if we can remember to order our life, to live our lives in this order, with Christ first, others second, and ourselves last, he said that is a recipe for joy that will never serve you wrong. Now, that's not to say that we're doormats. It doesn't say we forget about our needs or our value. It's not at all what it's saying. It's saying that if we put faith first, put God and Christ first in our lives, things are always going to go better. And if we can learn to serve others and look outward, we will always find more happiness, more joy, more satisfaction in our lives. I've said this for years. If you're feeling down, go out and serve someone. We've all experienced that, where we were having a hard time and somebody came by and served us, and suddenly we're feeling better. Isn't that interesting? So regardless of what you believe faith-wise, if you can remember that model, put God or the universe or your higher power first. I say joy, or J as in Jesus, as my friend Joe shared, Jesus Christ. If you put that first, it focuses you, it centers you, helps you look up, helps you reach higher, helps you have hope and faith for a better future. Most service missionaries, whether they served a 2-week service mission in Africa or a 2-year service mission in Rome, Italy, as I did in my early 20s, most missionaries will come back and tell you that it was the best 2 years of their life. And I believe it's because for most of our lives, we're focused inward. We're focused on our jobs, our schooling, our work, our worries, our girlfriend, boyfriend, our health. But we are looking inward. And yet when you go out and serve, whether as a proselyting missionary, a service missionary, even in the military, you will look outward. You will be focused on anyone but yourself more often than not. And then you hear missionaries come back and say, that was the best 2 years of my life. Why do they say that? Well, I believe it's because it's not just tied to things. It's not just happiness that's tied to these external influences. It is true joy that comes from serving others, from following Christ's perfect example and becoming more altruistic, more selfless, and more focused on others than on yourself. This happens on a mass scale too. I mean, think about the miracle on ice that the 1980 Winter Olympics. The U.S. men's hockey team, they're this group of underdogs. They defeated the heavily favored Soviet team. That moment didn't just bring joy to the players, it lifted an entire nation. People still talk about that game because it was more than just a victory. It was a moment that reminded every one of us what's possible when you believe in something bigger than yourself, when you look outward, when you serve, when you give all that you have to something. The joy that came from that game spread across the country, and it united people in a way that only sports can. Well, maybe not only sports, but where in a way that sports most definitely does, just as service most definitely does. Some joy happens naturally. Other times it takes work or a change of perspective or a collective effort to take place in our lives. But ultimately, when we work at it, when we seek it, we choose it, we put everything we have into making it come to pass, invariably it comes to pass. It comes more fully and frequently and more abundantly into our entire experience. Stephen Covey talked about how oftentimes it requires a paradigm shift. When we come back from break, I'd like to share this example with you because it's a great example of choosing it, of changing how we view things, and not just how we feel or how we think, but how we see a situation, a relationship, a challenge. And when we do that, it's another technique, another secret for infusing more joy into our lives. Christ is, of course, the perfect example. My friend Joe Olivetti is a great example. I mean, he serves his family, his grandkids, his community, his church. He serves us here on the Certainty team, and so much more. The greatest example is Jesus Christ. He didn't just live a life of joy, but he brought light and joy and hope to others. And my question is, are we doing the same? So we're up against our first and only break. When we come back, I'll share Stephen Covey's thoughts on paradigm shifts, and I'm going to get into how we can do this. How can we, in addition to choosing it, right? That's the first step, desiring to believe, as they say, desiring to make it happen. If we can just plant that seed of desire and let it grow, it can grow into great things. But there's so much more. I'll be sharing a lot more examples when we come back from our break. Don't go away. Appreciate you being with me this morning here on Finding Certainty. And I'll be right back. So I always say on the YouTube video, you get a little bit of insight. This example that I'm talking about from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, I highly recommend you take the time to read it. He shares the psychology behind it. He shares examples, multiple examples of people who did range through the camps, giving away their last piece of bread, lifting others up, even when they didn't have the strength, the energy, even the nutrition to give much. They still gave what they could. And do you know that it's what helped them survive? There's countless examples of people that have done exactly that. We think of Nelson Mandela going through his experience being in prison for over 20 years. I believe it was 25 or 27 years, and surviving, and at the end coming out with a forgiving heart. He was able to be a model for the entire nation, for all of South Africa, and also the world, a model of forgiveness, patience, love, and ultimately he brought joy to his country and was an example for all of us of how to do so. So it was one of my heroes. He's a great example of what I'm talking about. So we're coming back.
You're listening to Finding Certainty with Patrick Laing, Have a question for Patrick or his guests? Join us on the show at 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Now, back to the show with Patrick.
So before the break, I was talking about Stephen Covey, who's the author of the bestseller, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. And he shared a story once about when he was in New York, traveling on the train or subway from New Jersey to New York, I believe. It was this beautiful Sunday morning. This light was flitting through the windows when they were above ground, and people were relaxed. They were reading their papers. I believe Stephen Covey was going in to go to church. Just this really nice, peaceful Sunday morning. Well, and then at one of the stops, a man got on, sat next to Brother Covey, and he had several young children with him. Well, the kids just started wreaking havoc. Right? They were running up and down the aisles. They were pushing each other and yelling, and one of them was crying, and they were even knocking people's newspapers and bumping into people. And this gentleman who was sitting next to Stephen Covey didn't even notice. He had his hands in his head. He was looking at the ground. And his kids just completely destroyed the whole feel of this nice, quiet, peaceful Sunday morning. Well, people were looking at the guy like, come on, what's your deal? Take care of your kids, right? Stephen Covey tapped the guy on the knee and said, "Sir, I don't know if you realize, but your kids are really wreaking havoc and really bothering people." And guy looks up, kind of looks around, and says, "Kids, get over here. Come sit down." It's like he calls him over there. He yells at him, made him sit down, and he turns to Stephen Covey and says, "I'm so sorry." He said, "We just came from the hospital, and their mother just passed away, and I don't know what we're going to do. She was our whole world." Well, Stephen Covey talks about how instantly he changed, not just how he felt or what he was thinking, but he changed how he saw this man and these kids instantaneously, right? He had what he calls a paradigm shift, where he saw this man differently and instantly felt differently about the situation. Instead, being irritated, which he was, he felt instant compassion, concern, and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Here, let me help you with the kids. And is there anything I can do to assist?" Well, he goes on to talk about how important paradigm shifts are in our life. I believe, and he concurs, he teaches this in his book. I highly recommend it, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. He teaches about how critical it is for us to have paradigm shifts and not just let them happen subconsciously or inadvertently, as this one did, but to proactively seek better perspectives and different perspectives. As I said, Christ, of course, is the perfect example. But how do we do this, right? How do we become our own best example? Or how do we become an inspiration to others? How do we, learn this and to portray this for others? My parents have a sign in their house that says, "Reach up." It's right above the toilet, so you're going to see it whenever you go to the bathroom. But it's a reminder to reach up, to look up, both in the good times and the bad times. See, there is a space between stimulus and response. This is an old psychology and communication principle that when something happens, we're stimulated, somebody offends us, yells at us, even just talks to us, right? The longer we pause before we respond, usually the better the response. Well, it applies in life as well. It applies in anger management and control. It also applies most definitely in finding joy in our lives. Speaking of Jesus Christ, he was, as I've said, and I will say many times, the perfect example. He responded with patience, with temperance. He stopped and thought before he responded. You remember the example of the harlot, as he said, the woman taken in sin, who the elders brought to him, and he said, "What would you do with this woman, and how would you respond? How would you treat her? And he didn't say anything for several minutes. He sat and drew something in the dirt next to what he was sitting. And finally he spoke up, and it was a brilliant response. Those of you who have no sin, cast the first stone. Well, we know they all left. Part of Christ's example, part of why he was so good at what he did, is he didn't do things quickly. He paused, he took his time, and reached up, thought through them, and answered wisely and circumspectly. Now, joy isn't something that just happens, right? There's a fork in the road. There's a choice for us to reach up or sink low. One of the best examples I've ever heard is that when we experience pain or loss, or it can be something small like stubbing our toe, all the way up to a traumatic loss of a loved one or something like that. But when those things happen, we can choose to be temporal, to deal with them temporally, which is just to get upset, depressed, angry, or anxious, whatever the case might be. Or we can choose to respond spiritually. The example the speaker gave was that in our mind, we can go to Gethsemane in our minds. We can think of what Christ felt when he suffered for our sins. We can, in our mind's eye, we can picture him, try to gain a glimpse and a greater understanding of who he was and what he did. And whether you use Christ as your example, or you just use the opportunity to step back, have a longer period between stimulus and response, but to slow down, ask questions, use that mid-sight that I was talking about, and ask, what can I learn from this? Christ says to come unto me. Well, one of the best ways we can do that is to, when we experience these pains and losses and frustrations, to come unto him, to picture what he felt times infinity. When we do that, that is a recipe for not only surviving, but thriving and finding joy in our lives. Reach up. Choose the right when you come to that fork in the road. Step back. Have perspective. You will be amazed at what you learn, how you get through it, and maybe most importantly, who you become in the process. Now, joy isn't always so heavy, right? It can be found in life's simplest, most unexpected moments. If you think about it, you ever been sitting in traffic, stressed out, frustrated, when all of a sudden your favorite song comes on the radio? In that moment, the traffic doesn't matter anymore. At least for those few moments, joy takes over. That's the thing about joy. It doesn't wait for special occasions. It finds you in the middle of your everyday life, reminding you that it's still there, waiting to be noticed. You heard that last line, waiting to be noticed. It's kind of like God and prayer. He's not holding back. It's not usually us waiting on him as much as he's waiting on us. He's waiting to hear from us. He's waiting to be noticed, waiting to be remembered. Joy is and can be all around us if we just recognize it, if we see it, and if we let it in. Let's not forget how joy can sometimes make us do things we wouldn't normally do, like dancing when nobody's watching, or even when people are watching. I don't know about you, but there's something about joy that just makes you want to move. I mean, kids do it all the time, right? And no one questions it. But when an adult starts dancing in the grocery store or in line at the bank, people start giving them strange looks. And yes, that's the best part of joy. It makes us forget what other people think. It frees us. It can also help free others, and it can inspire them to greatness in their own lives. Speaking of unexpected joy, think about Jackie Robinson's first game in Major League Baseball. Breaking the color barrier wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a moment of collective joy for millions of people. who saw in him the hope of change, the beginning of equality in a sport, and ultimately in society. His courage and the joy that followed his success transcended the game itself. It wasn't just about baseball. It was about standing up for something greater. And joy in that moment was the reward for doing what was right, even when it was hard. Finding, even seeking joy becomes in and of itself an experience in greater joy because it's contagious. It mushrooms, it grows, it creates what I call ripple effects. It touches your own life and the lives of those around you. My son has a friend, I won't share his name, but he's 17 years old, and he's on the spectrum. He's got a little bit of autistic tendencies, but he has a lot of spiraling thoughts, where he feels worthless, he feels stressed, he feels worried. I tell him that these are the devil's tools, discouragement, anxiety. These are not always chemical. They're not always self-inflicted. Sometimes they're external. They're trying to get you down. The devil, I believe, uses those tools as tools of destruction. He uses them to keep us down. I remember I was getting ready to leave on my full-time mission to Italy. This is almost 40 years ago, 35 years ago. And I was so excited. I was going to Rome, Italy. I really wanted to go to Europe, really wanted to learn a lesson, a language. I'd been called to serve in Rome, and I was worthy. I was excited. And I had this period where I suddenly felt depressed. And my mom, I was talking to her about it, and I said, Mom, what's going on here? I have no reason to be feeling the depression or the anxiety that I'm feeling. Maybe I'm just nervous, but it's more than that. I just feel down. She told me, she says, what do you think happens when, you're trying to do good? You're trying to make a difference. You're literally a threat to the adversary. You're seeking to make and create more light in the world. Said, well, he is going to go to work on you and try to get you down and try to get you off track. He is going to try to suck the joy out of your life. Now, he might put one little devil in a bar to cover the whole place, but he might have 16 of them sitting on your shoulders when you are a threat to him. I always remembered that. It's about the same time I read the book from Viktor Frankl, and it really impacted me. I've always remembered that when I'm getting down, discouraged, overwhelmed, those aren't always helpful. They're rarely helpful, but they're not always internal. They're not always real. There's a real suicide epidemic these days in our youth. Talking of my son's friend, I spend time coaching him on his thought processes, on these principles I'm teaching of stepping back and asking questions. I've taught him how to try to find joy, how to question these thoughts and feelings he's had, how to, as they say, doubt your doubts. I love that saying. I can't remember who said it, but it was doubt your doubts, doubt those worries, doubt those fears, doubt those feelings of overwhelm. Dale Carnegie, he wrote a book called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. He teaches the principle that one of the best ways to overcome worry is to picture the worst possible scenario, come up with a solution for that scenario, whatever it might be, and then tell yourself it's probably not going to happen. This solution, this plan I have is probably not going to be necessary. But just by addressing the elephant in the room, as it were, your worst fear, and then coming up with a plan, it eliminates worry. I've used that also for many, many years, and it is a recipe not only for joy, but for peace. Christ is such a good example because throughout his life, he not only taught and portrayed these principles, but he created these ripple effects that I'm talking about. He filled the lives around him with light. And we need to do the same. There's a lot of ways we can do this. I talked about giving service, about focusing outward. Talked about stopping and pausing and stepping back and just asking questions. That period between stimulus and response. I talked about the fork in the road and reaching up and choosing a different path, of being a different person. You have that within your right. As Viktor Frankl said, the only right that can be taken from you is the ability to choose your attitude in any given situation. If he can do it in a Nazi concentration camp, can we do it with a mortgage hanging over our head, or a deadline at work, or a relationship that's struggling? I believe we can. Go to Gethsemane. Picture Christ. Picture what he took on for you. Not just our sins, not just our poor choices, but also our hurts, our fears, the abuse, all of it he took on. If we remember that and let him have it, we can find more joy in our own lives. Now, another reminder for recognizing and even reveling in the joy of life is to find purpose in life, to work hard, to learn, to grow, and to become more of who we can be. My son Evan, he's 18 years old, and he's going through this. He's trying to find his way. I've been helping him with job search, and we were able to just spend a couple of weeks in Utah recently, and he came and kind of just tagged along, was a shadow, came to my business appointments, got to do a little bit of camping and fishing up in the Uinta Mountains. We stopped in Zion National Park for a couple of days, and we got to talk about these topics. And it's fun seeing him find this purpose in his life. It's what we're trying to help his friend Cedrus find his purpose in his life. We're involving him in our work, trying to give them a focus on a better tomorrow. I think that whatever you do with your life, whether it's go to school or not, work for someone else or not, or start your own business, travel or stay home, whether you're outgoing or introverted, whoever you are, you need to suck the marrow out of it. Remember Robin Williams in the classic film, The Dead Poets Society. He talked to his students about sucking the marrow out of life. Keep growing, learning, expanding, and experiencing. Get out and see the world. Make new friends, expand your vision, your view. Remember that these principles are real. They're enduring, and they can apply in your own life. Unfortunately, Robin Williams lost sight of this. He was so talented, so beloved, but he lost sight of the way in which to fill his life with joy, of these ways that could help. Now, we all know that depression can be chemical, it can be extremely challenging, overwhelming, even all-encompassing, right? These recommendations and reminders that I'm sharing with are not always sufficient. Sometimes you need medical help. Sometimes you could use a good prescription, a good therapist, the support of friends and professionals. But I believe these principles can most definitely contribute. And in many cases, these reminders are enough. When we ask ourselves that Oz principle question, or what else can I do? The best answer is oftentimes ask for help. It's not being a victim. That's admitting that you're not perfect and you can't do everything by yourself. I think it's a really important reminder when it comes to finding joy. Another tip is to take part in joy-filled experiences. Fill your life with people who you want to be like, who are positive and uplifting. They say we become the sum total of the 5 people we spend the most time with. Well, I think the same applies to experiences. Are we hanging out in bars and with people who are making poor choices, using substances, trying to drown their worries or shoot them up their vein? How are we trying to find joy, and is it truly effective? Are we surrounding ourselves by people and influences that are never going to get there? They're fleeting, in fact, may even be destructive. Personally, it's one of the reasons I like living here in Henderson, Nevada, is the Las Vegas shows. I find them to be extraordinary. Some are better than others, but most of them are fantastic. In fact, I'm wearing my silk Las Vegas. It looks like a disco shirt. If you're on the YouTube video, you can see I wore this shirt specifically for this reason, because it's a nod to filling our life with joy-filled experiences. Now, that doesn't need to cost any money. It could just be service. It could be getting out into nature. It could be hanging out with friends. I like going to the shows. I always tell my team, come visit. I get comp tickets all the time as a radio host. Just in the last 30 days, we went to MJ Live with my son. We went to a show called Raiding the Rock Vault with him and his girlfriend. My wife and I just got to see Lionel Richie just a week ago. We got free tickets from my cousin Joe. Shout out to Joe Gledhill, who had purchased them back in February, was not able to attend. He called and asked us if we wanted them. We said, "Are you kidding?" Of course we did. It was fantastic. It was just such a great way to fill your life with joy, is to have fun and to have fulfilling experiences. Just the other night, we went to a cover band show, got 4 free tickets, took our friends Tony and Jamie Salazar. We saw a Clash cover band, a Police cover band, and a Bob Marley cover band, and they were fantastic. I mean, I think the Police one was our favorite, but we love the shows. We love the restaurants. Shout out to Lou Remillard and Crepe Expectations. We just had lunch there the other day, my friend Peter Rancy and myself. And so, what are you doing to fill your life with light, with those things? Seriously, there are a few things in this world that bring as much joy as music. Think about Beethoven, who composed some of the most joyful, uplifting music despite losing his hearing. His Ninth Symphony, particularly the Ode to Joy, is one of the most iconic pieces of music in history. And Beethoven couldn't even hear it himself, but he felt it. And that joy is something that resonates with people to this day. It's a reminder that joy isn't dependent on our external circumstances, as I said before. It's something we create from within. There are many other examples of that, from the Beatles, Elton John. I mean, think of Michael Jackson and his music and his dance. They were iconic performances, and that dancing, the music, the singing, even MJ and his moves, his style, his energy, they were infectious. They radiated joy. There are a lot of ways to take part in joy-filled experiences, and they don't need to take money. There are free festivals, farmers markets, service opportunities, more. That's one reason we enjoy being a part of a church. There's community and fellowship and fun. We have a big trunk or treat every October for the kids. It's coming up, and it's always great. Think about the everyday moments, like watching a child's face light up with joy. They don't need much, right? Just the simplest things like blowing bubbles or chasing after a butterfly can make them giggle with pure delight. Children remind us that joy isn't something we have to chase. It's something we can find in the smallest of moments. And wasn't it Christ who said to become as little children? As adults, we often forget this. We get caught up in our responsibilities, our worries. We forget that joy is always there, waiting to be noticed. But the truth is, joy is everywhere. It's in the laughter of a friend, the warmth of a hug, the beauty of a sunrise. It's in the simple act of sitting quietly with someone you love, or serving someone that you don't even know. You don't need to say a word. You just feel the joy. There's so much more I could say. I'll close with this. You can find the joy, but don't think it's so far away. Realize that it's all around you. It grows through connection. It grows through service. It grows through collaboration. It grows in and creates these ripple effects that we talk about And it happens almost automatically. All we have to do is start the spark. J is for Jill. J is for John, my accountant. He just did my taxes. Talk about joy, right? I told him I want to have another kid and name him John. That'd be easy. It's my first name and it's my dad's name. I find joy in a lot of the little things, and I'm grateful for the examples in my life. One of the greatest is my wife, Tesha, and the joy she brings to me. These are all things that we can accomplish together, that we can create these ripple effects that go out for many years to come. I have experienced a great deal of joy in my life. I continue to seek it. I'm trying to be an example. I'm grateful for the examples that I've received. Next month, I'm going to be talking about kindness, which is another reminder, another principle that leads to joy. We're out of time. I appreciate you listening to me today, and I hope you gain something from it. Remember, certainty is out there. You can find it, and we can help. And joy is both within you, it's all around you, and it's waiting to be noticed. I wish you the very best. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Take care. So we're still going here on YouTube. I always like to share a few other examples. I talk about sharing these principles and sharing these joy-filled experiences and creating ripple effects. Things are always better, I think, when we share them and when we share in them and when we expand them by doing so. Take the example of the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Thousands of people came together, not just to witness history, but to participate in it. As the wall came down, joy spread across Berlin and across the world. Families that had been separated for years were reunited, and a nation that had been divided by ideology came together. It wasn't just about politics. It was about the sheer joy of freedom and the hope for a better future. Things are always better when we share them and when we look outward, as I said, and pass them on, as we pay them forward, as it's said. There's this movement in the last few years of people not getting married and families not having children. I think it's a recipe for disaster. Not to get political, but relationships and parenting take a great deal of work, but they create so much joy and satisfaction and fulfillment. In this syndicated radio host's opinion, they are the secret to joy, even though they're hard, because through them we grow, we learn how to be selfless, we learn how to be mature, we learn how to give, how to share, we learn how to serve. And these are fundamental to the development of joy in our lives. You know, this show is broadcast all over the world. We're syndicated on Apple and Google, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio. I will say this to anyone listening. If you will try to understand this principle, try to add people into your life. Even if it's hard for you, there is someone out there for you, but you have got to put yourself out there. You got to have faith and courage. Join groups, join clubs, join a church. Get to know more people. If you need to make changes in your life so you're more of a person who someone would want to be with, maybe you have to change your hygiene, maybe work on your employment, maybe work on your vocabulary, your communication skills. These are all things you can do. Go join Toastmasters and learn how to speak better. Get some coaching on your maybe your wardrobe. Get a better job, go back to school, start a business, progress. Don't just sit and wait and waste away. You don't have to be alone. No, I've heard people say that, well, I don't have enough love to give. I used to think that when I had my first son, then I was going to have a second son. I thought, well, am I going to have to divide my love between them? And that's not the case. That old animated Christmas movie, The Grinch That Stole Christmas, you see at the end, his heart grows bigger. And it most definitely does. I didn't love my second son any less than the first one. I didn't have to take love from the first one and give it to the second one. It just grew. I have 5 children. My heart grew 5 times bigger. With my wife, 6, 7, 10 times bigger. It just grows. And that is where true joy comes from. Think about a time when you've been in a serious situation and something small, something unexpected, or someone makes you burst out laughing. That joy is its purest form, and it's hard to do when it's done alone. It reminds us that life is meant to be enjoyed and to be shared, not just endured and survived. At the heart of all of this is the idea that joy is about connection. It's about connecting with others, with ourselves, with the world around us. That's what comedians do. Another thing I like about Vegas, I have great comedians. I like the clean ones, but it isn't just something we feel, it's something we create, something we share, something we build together. I talked about my accountant, John. We've been working together, catching up taxes and getting finances caught up. I can't tell you how much of a blessing that is. My friend Jill is a great example of this, as is my wife, as I said. As I look at my life, I think of my children, my work, my faith, my family, and then my best friend, my sweetheart, Tesha, and Thomas Laing. They're my big 5. I hope you have your own big 5. And if you're missing one of them or you wish it was better, don't just sit and wait. You're not going to improve your career, improve your outlook, and make friends, create relationships, or make your future bright if you sit on your couch eating Cheetos watching Wheel of Fortune. It's not going to happen. And it is a downward spiral. Just as infusing light and joy into your life becomes a ripple effect of beauty and opportunity and joy, the opposite can happen. It's a downward spiral. It's a slippery slope into a hole of depression, discouragement, hopelessness, and potentially even worse, even death. And it's not worth it. There's so much joy to be found. There's so much marrow to be sucked, as they say. I hope you have your big 5. And if you don't, I hope you will go out and create them. At our company, Certainty Management, we talk about profit, protection, and purpose. And these aren't just things that happen. You have to go out and create them. You have to ask for help. I mean, that's what our whole company is about. It's about helping our clients create these things in their lives and organizations, about helping them find them, develop them, expand them, and become them. These are things that we all need help to accomplish. Remember that important question, what else can we do? And add on one more word, together. What else can we do together? That's why delegation is so important. If you're a manager or an owner, because it frees you up. It empowers others. It shows that you trust them. It obviously helps you get more done. I know I have experienced a lot more joy since I've learned and am learning how to delegate. And I have extraordinary help from Victoria Foster, Jill McCauley, Andy Tenney, David Basquette. The list goes on and on. I'm finding more certainty in my own life, and most definitely more happiness and joy. I also find more peace of mind, more certainty, and yes, more joy when I stay true to my principles. When I'm honest, generous, selfless, and true. I think this applies to anyone. I think when we are authentic and genuine and kind, we inevitably feel more joy in our lives. I'm going to give you a hint about why my next monologue is going to be K is for kindness. I have a podcaster that I listen to every week named Jared Halverson. He does a podcast called Unshaken, where he breaks down the scriptures and dissects them and talks about them each week as part of a series called Come Follow Me. He teaches an important principle. I just heard him this morning. I listen in the shower, and as I'm getting dressed, and he said, one of the most important things we can do is to slow down. I talk about this space between stimulus and response, but slowing down and stepping back and giving time and attention to those things most important. He gave the example of Christ when he appeared to Mary Magdalene at the empty tomb. He told her not to touch him. He said he hadn't ascended to his Father yet. He had a pretty important appointment, right? He was going back to meet with God. He's going to return and report, as they say. And yet he stopped for a moment and told her not to worry, told her to go tell the others. He gave her his time and his attention. He was kind, even with a more important appointment than even meeting with the president, right? He was meeting with God, with his Father. And yet he stopped and gave this woman, Mary Magdalene, who we know he loved, he gave her his time. One of the greatest things we can do to create joy in our lives is to be present. I read a book once called The Present, and it says the greatest present or gift we can give to someone is to be present. To put down our phone, turn off the TV perhaps, lay down our newspaper, whatever it is, and be focused on who we're with. It takes work. Jared Halverson, the speaker on Unshaken, talks about a recipe for joy, a recipe for fulfillment in our lives. He says, pause, which we've talked about today. He says, ponder, think about it. Ask those questions. What can I learn? He says, pray, reach up, as I've said, prepare. Okay, let's come up with a plan. Remember our technique I shared about how to overcome worry. Make a plan. Think of the worst case scenario, make a plan, and then tell yourself it's probably not going to happen. And then his last was persist. These things aren't always easy, right? Life is hard, but we need to persist. Obviously my monologue went on a little bit long today. You're getting lots more on the YouTube than they got on the radio show, but that's the gift, or that's the blessing of hanging with me here. You have to look at me in this terrible shirt. This is not a shirt that I purchased, just so you know. This is a shirt that was given to me. Had a very wealthy investor that I met with here in town, and we were at a lunch, and I just said, I love your shirt. I said, I don't think I said I love it, because I don't know that I do, but I said, great shirt, right? I was just complimenting him. And he said, let me give it to you. And I said, whoa. I said, no, you don't have to give me your shirt. He goes, nope. He goes, somebody says they like my shirt. I take it off and I give it to him on the spot. And he would not take no for an answer. This is like a $500 shirt. I mean, you can't feel it here through the YouTube video, but it is silk. It is this like gold-plated buttons on it. It's the shirt I often wear when we go to a show at Vegas, because it just feels really Las Vegas. But I bring that up because this guy, who was a little bit crazy, very wealthy, but obviously he could afford it. But he was a good example of somebody who didn't just live life halfway. He doesn't just give 10%. He gives 110%. He gave me his shirt, literally his shirt off his back. And it's a little bit big for me. He's a pretty big guy, but it is comfort. It feels like pajamas, literally. And but I love that. I love that. It was actually a good example for me, a good lesson of somebody who gives freely of himself. You know, a life full of joy is a life in which we recognize the joy that is around us, even in our most unexpected moments. It grows from a life lived with purpose and certainty. It's the spark that lights up the ordinary and turns it into something extraordinary. It's something we can find more of if we surround ourselves by people, experiences, events, and even comedians that will help. One of the very best ways we can find joy is to look outward. Remember Joe's acronym of joy: Jesus, others, and you. And even if you're not a Christian, or don't believe in him, believe in something. Believe in God, a higher power, Allah, the universe, karma. Believe in the future. Believe in the impact you can have. Believe that things can get better. Believe in the inherent goodness of others. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Agree to disagree. These are all more recipes for peace and joy. Give people the latitude to be who they are. I encourage you to look for the good, to focus on what we have in common, not what we differ on. When we do these things, we live with certainty. We don't just chase happiness, we find joy. And in doing so, we create more of it for ourselves and others. There's a lot more we could talk about, but this is probably enough to noodle on, to chew on, to reflect on over this next week. Very excited about the upcoming guests here on Finding Certainty. We've got some big names coming, some really insightful experts on this topic of certainty. I almost said this elusive topic of certainty, but I don't believe it is elusive. I think it's easy. I think it's there for the taking. Just like joy, it is right in front of us. It's all around us if we just open our eyes. This was the message I gave to my son's young friend. I hope more of us, especially our youth, can understand this and make the most of it. I hope they'll remember it. I hope you'll remember it. I hope I can remember it. And I hope we can be examples thereof. Thanks for listening. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you, if you're a fan, stopping by every week. And if you're new to our show, I hope you'll come back. We have a good time here on Finding Certainty. I wish you the very best. Thanks, and bye for now.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of Finding Certainty. We hope you've gained some more insight into how to create more certainty in your own business or nonprofit. Join us next week for another taste of the certainty experience. Until then, we wish you greater certainty in all that you do.